Oh God. Okay. um, I think this might be the first time I've made a video explicitly for primarily for the or done a stream primarily for the purposes of recording something. But all right. If you are watching this, I need you to understand that the information that I'm about to give you is very delicate, and I am uncertain if I'm doing something dangerous by even disseminating it in this particular way. But I'm hoping, because I have no reach and because I intend to move very quickly and be a little bit kind of strange with how I articulate things, that I'm not going to, that my intervention is not going to be one that is destructive and is going to expose these ideas to capture. But I do run, I guess I do run that risk. There's, who knows? So, if you're listening to this, does your soul long for freedom? Do you ache in ways that you don't understand? Do you do things that are not what you want to do? And you wonder why you did them. And then when you do the things you think you want to do, they leave you dissatisfied. Do you wish that capitalism was over? Whatever the hell capitalism is. Do you feel a longing in your heart for some kind of age from the past that might not have even been real, but there's this memory of a time that maybe you don't even really remember, but you think is there? Do you feel very confused about the state of the world and the way that people talk about it and the way that it's presented? Like there's something contradictory or something missing? Well, I'm about to give you a crash course in a tool that I have found, a conceptual apparatus that allows you to start building out a web by which you can understand the actual way that the world is constructed currently and start finding your way within it in order to hopefully oh, hi, welcome in. I'm about to get into it. So in order to understand, to start being able to make a map so that you can intervene in the world, have some kind of agency in order to express yourself, and hopefully to be able to go even beyond this, to kind of, at the very least, the minimal goal is to achieve more self-freedom. The maximal goal is to make an intervention into human history and bring about a better end to the world than the current one that is we're seemingly headed towards. But that's getting ahead of things. The baseline point here is we want to understand what the fuck. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that word on the. I didn't mark the stream for that. Anyway, we want to understand what's actually happening. We want to understand what the truth of the world is and why it's contradictory and confusing and what might be missing. And we have a conceptual apparatus here to begin to do this. So, what am I introducing to you? So, this is my own understanding of Transcendental Kabbalah, which is so what is Transcendental Kabbalah? It is a system of philosophy that in a comprehensive systematic philosophy developed by Heinrich Hendricks, who is best known for being the leader of the band Liturgy, which is an experimental black metal band. And so what is the, so why is she developing this system? So what is the point of this system, and where are we going with it? So as I already sort of hinted at with what I said earlier, so the starting point of this is we want to imagine that the world could be really different. And you have a feeling in your heart, a longing in your heart, that there's a possibility of a world where things are more free, things are more beautiful. The wounds that currently hold us down, hold us back, could really be healed. That we could really express ourselves without it always turning backwards and being the wrong thing. That we could be free from external controls. And that there are glimmers and sparks of ways to kind of work towards this kind of goal embedded in the history of politics and art and thought and music. That there is this kind of heartbeat, this spiritual heartbeat of the world and of the human race that is really there, and that if you learn to perceive it through history and in the present, you can sort of make contact with it and kind of become an agent that serves it in a way that is sort of dialectical, where you are serving something that's beyond yourself, but the big thing is that you have a unique contribution to make to it. Like, it is not merely that you serve it. It is not merely a full submission over to something. You also have a piece of it in your heart that is totally yours. And this heartbeat that is, the agent of human history, you could sort of think of it as, there's different kind of ways to imagine it. You could think about, like, the path of, you could imagine that, like, we're stuck in, there's all sorts of different graspings at it from different kind of perspectives. So you could think about, we're all kind of in the wheel of samsara, and what if we got out of it? What if we got out of it? You could think about the apocalyptic ideas embedded with apocalyptic and messianic ideas embedded within, like, Abrahamic religions, most intensely within, like, Christianity, but this idea that, like, there is a really transformed world that could come about that is maybe even beyond this world, but that there is, been kind of glimmers here and there, and that it could be brought about. And, there's, it's like theosophy has different anyway, there's a lot of different kind of strains about this. Or you could think of it in a more secular way. This is actually kind of what Marxism is this idea that there's this trend of humankind developing itself and overcoming itself, and that there is a possibility for the overthrow of all the, at the end of time, there's a possibility for the overthrow of all the, what's the word? Like oppression, relations of oppression and domination that have been necessary for this kind of developments to happen. And that there's glimmers of hope of resistance and kind of better ways and more compassionate ways and more kind of humane ways of living that have been revealed throughout history, and we can learn from them and kind of create some sort of coalition that is based in the current circumstances that advances this. And but anyway, and so this is making this is in Hyla Hendrix's thought. This is called the Arc, and her general kind of project is called Arc Work, which is her personal attempt to kind of intervene in human history. And that is the kind of, that's the pre-ground for all of this stuff, is that, like, what if we made contact with this kind of materials that exist and bring about a different world using them. All right. Now, this philosophical component is basically the theory of the laid out theory for how do we do that? How do we do that? And, I'm not going to try to explain the entire system or whatever. Of course I couldn't. And it would actually be probably very bad if I did, because it would be dangerous for it. However, this is introducing you to a little map that if you get it in your brain, you can keep thinking about it, and it'll allow you to cut it'll allow you to cut through a lot of information that is given to you, and to kind of see in a new way. Okay, so what you are looking at here is the Sephirot, and it is a map of the entirety of reality. Now, there is a lot of different ways that you can consider this, but for the sake of, if you really want to get the most out of what I'm going to try to explain here, imagine that, shoot, I decided to do this completely on a whim because I hoped that me being a little bit incoherent and unprepared about it would actually probably be better and make this less. Anyway, so how to begin? Okay, so we want to imagine that the world has, now, what do we even mean by the world? Okay, where do we even start? We want to imagine that there is a ground to everything that you can perceive and everything that you can know in your world. And when we start with your specific world, the world as you perceive it. Now, you might perceive this world external to you, but ultimately you are perceiving it yourself. And so this is, so in the name Transcendental Kabbalah, the transcendental part has to do with the philosophy. Like, it comes from, it's a school, it has to do with thinking about, it has to do with Immanuel Kant, the philosopher. But anyway, the point of the transcendental element is that your perception of reality has like components that structure it. So you, for example, if you can take a physical example, right? So you perceive the world through your senses, right? Your touch, your taste, your smell, your sight, your hearing, your sense of balance, right? When you perceive a phenomenon that is happening around you, someone walks by, you can see them, you can feel the air as they move, as they walk by. You can potentially smell what they smell like, right? I don't know, if you're kind of intimate with them, maybe you'll taste them as they walk by. I don't know. But you can imagine that there exists kind of fundamental structures analogous to your senses that exist at the level of like wherever your self is, your core deep self. Now that that you might think of as your mind or as your heart, perhaps, or your soul, depending on how you tend to think about it. But there's some deep self, and the way that deep self kind of looks out into the world has fundamental structures that are around it that are much more kind of abstract than like the physical senses, but they're analogous sort of to it. And this is a method for describing what those are. And if you understand what they are, you can have a more like sharpened relationship to each of them, because we live in a state of we tend to live in a state of kind of, one of two things tends to happen, is that we are either presented that like one of these senses is the only true one and the other ones are fake and false and like illusory, or we live in a state of like false synesthesia, oh my God, synesthesia, whereby they're being mixed together indiscriminately without understanding that they are like really separate. So the fundamental act that you want to do is to understand that they are, so A, they are all real on their own terms, and B, that that before you can start trying to bring them together, to synthesize them, you have to separate them out in order to see them clearly. Like, because they don't fit together in a way that is like you can try to bring them into a productive dialogue, but they have a tension. They don't want to work together. All right. So, okay. Where do we start with this? So, you have probably heard of the four classical elements of fire, water, earth, and air. If you are into any kind of esotericism, you probably have a more robust relationship to them. But we can use those as a basic kind of framework for starting to see what we're talking about here. So one of the difficulties, I started saying this earlier, but I couldn't find the words for it. One of the difficulties with these is that it seems, some of this seems kind of like, when you go through this, any individual part of it, it can seem kind of like, what's the word? Like obvious, or like, that's not quite it. Like overly simple to the point that you want to just say, oh yeah, sure. But you don't consider that, like, if you, the thing is when you study philosophy, is that you actually, when you like study like people who are really seriously thinking about reality in kind of complex and challenging and deep ways, these categories kind of continue to emerge at a deeper level. Like these kind of fundamental different ways of understanding things continue to emerge at a deeper level once you realize what you're looking for. And it is actually like it's a much more, you can have a much more serious relationship to it if you really, if you give it a little space to kind of take root. All right. So I guess let's start with the two center okay, so is my thing working now? What is going to be the best way to do this, because my mouse had to charge, and so my drawing pad is okay. So if we're looking at this chart, so there is I guess I drew this in a way where I don't, how do we want to start with it? Okay, so there's four divisions, right? There's four divisions that move downward and kind of are like, there's sort of a decrease in intensity as you move from the top to the bottom, as you notice the number go from 1 to 10, right? So let's start from the two in the middle. So these two in the middle that correspond to the elements of water and air are they're the easiest to distinguish from each other. And when you get to people who are doing thinking, like philosophers or scientists, they tend to, these are the two ones that you're going to encounter most often when it comes to, and they tend to take one very seriously and kind of dismiss the other. So air is almost the most straightforward, right? Air is when you are doing kind of like, this is the realm of language, of like science and math. This is, these are ideas. These are like thoughts. Like this is the realm where stuff is attempting to kind of cohere into little like you're trying to bring stuff together into rational knowledge. And this capacity that you have for rational knowledge is real, but it doesn't it isn't the whole of the thing, right? But it has this power on its own to affect and change the world, right? So like if you look at, we the entire last 300 years of history have been really, really defined by technological advances, that feed into each other in a kind of nonlinear way between math and science and industry, right? A very straightforward example for modern people is to look at how computer science, like we have, I'm here talking to you as a VTuber on the internet, right? And this came about because we had people in the early 1900s who made developments in theoretical math, and then this led to and they said, let's get very, very formal about it. And there were advances in thinking about how to talk about mathematical objects and set theory and all this stuff in a very, very kind of in a way that would kind of maximize like communication and clarity and simplicity. And then this gave birth to the beginnings of computation theory, which then gave birth to the computer, which was developed as part of a kind of rational strategy by funding from the governments to fight the Cold War, right? And then it eventually gave birth to this kind of communication system where now everything is kind of being transmitted through ones and zeros and 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 ones and zeros. And so the whole point of the internet is that it's this perfect realm of communicability. Now, we're running in this kind of layer on top of it that is much more uncertain, where I am still, a person who's having this kind of uncertain dialogue with you. But it is there's this kind of precise translation where, it's quantized. So there's, stuff's always getting cut off, but you're hearing my voice across the void. Okay. Air. What more do I want to say on this for now? Let's just keep moving through it. Let's just keep moving. Okay, so now above air, so as you move down the tree, right? As you move from the top down the tree, each layer is like taking what was in the layer above it and kind of translating it in a different way, right? So what air is attempting, what the kind of rational zone is attempting to grab hold of, right? So another thing is that these are kind of like fire and air are kind of masculine, and water and earth are kind of feminine. And what that really means is you can think of it much more in terms of kind of like active, kind of coherent, like put together, but also in a way that is kind of like maybe oppressive or deceptive, maybe, versus kind of passive, kind of like incoherent, in a, but maybe sort of in a way that is kind of freer, but also maybe kind of is less effective or more is kind of dominated, like, but it's a very complicated thing. But anyway, so science, rationality, it has this attempt at hardness, right? And it has limits, and but what it is trying to do, it is trying to take what's been given to it from the realm of water above it and cohere it into something that is kind of workable and communicable and understandable. Now, what is this thing that it is trying to kind of grab a hold of that is the realm of water? You can consider a scientific study of an ecosystem. You wander into this forest, and there is an entire world happening there, right? That doesn't really actually really actually capturable. It isn't actually, so like the air, the fundamental act of air is, I mentioned quantization earlier. So quantization, if you don't know what that means, so that's when you take an analog signal, right? So my voice is moving through the air, and it is this kind of signal that doesn't really have a zero level of like precision, right? Like it has this kind of quality of, it just keeps moving, and you can get like closer and closer to it. Like if you were to, that doesn't communicate it well either. What do I mean? There's something that's just like fully flowing, and you take it and you lose some of what it means, but then it becomes communicable, right? So my voice goes into the computer, but the file that contains my voice in the computer can only be so precise. It can only contain so much of the information of the actual nuances of what I said, and part of that has to do with the recording instruments, but a lot of it has to do with like the size of the file and the way that the file records information, because it has to choose a certain unit of time to divide the voice into, and like a certain level of like precision with how much numbers it's using to describe each part of the wave, right? So that this is the transition from water to air, right? So if you think about an ecosystem, you have a certain number, you have all these animals, and plants and fungi and bacteria, and all kind of working within this ecosystem. And then there's like sunlight coming in, and there's conditions of the soil, and like all these things are interacting in a way that is completely like non-rational and like in kind of unpredictable. And there's this kind of there's these kind of feedback loops and input output mechanisms where the if you can think about the introduction of an invasive species or whatever. You introduce like, I don't know, this kind of plant that kills other plants, right? And then suddenly like one of the plants that feeds these little you've got some little tiny little you have a plant that is fed on by a certain kind of insect, and then you introduce an invasive plant, and then it messes up the plant that the insects eat, and then those insects die, and then this messes up the diet of some like little mammal that feeds on the insects, and this messes up the diet of a larger predator that eats those mammals, and then like this messes up the like fungi that eat on their corpse, and then suddenly like you have just like this massive event of death that is and that's a negative example, but I guess it was the simplest way for me to think about like there's these kind of relations of interconnectivity that don't really have a beginning or end of the chain. Like it's just a chain. Like it's just a giant network. It's a giant network. It's a giant chain without beginning or end. In the way that particular nodes interact is just like collisions that don't really make sense and cause unpredictable effects. And like it's this big. It's a big flow. It's a big flow. It's a big flow. It's very strange. It's kind of mysterious. Like and it's a giant. You can try to map the network, but you're really only ever mapping it, right? Like and it's always imperfect, and it always kind of escapes you, and when you attempt to make contact with desire in your heart, right? Desire that corresponds to like, what do I want to do with my life? What do I really want to do with my life? Or like sexual desire, right? What am I really wanting out of this relationship? What am I wanting with this person? What is this strange thing that drives me? What is it that really calls to me about this or that particular thing? Or especially when you attempt to make art or music, right? You're trying to get in contact with this kind of thing inside of you that is that seems to always elude you, and it's always one step ahead of you. And it's completely like it's like not even irrational. It's like it's irrational. Like it has nothing to do with rationality. Like it's beyond you. It's higher than you, and it's like but it has this like it's this field of potential that can be tapped into, right? There's all these feedback loops that you can tap into, right? And you know, so people who are just like deeply into like the avant-garde art world, or uh you know, wanting to like just kind of make super weird stuff, you know, like this is the realm that they're existing in. And the reason that it matters is because like this exists on a higher level than your rational representations of like who you are and what your identity is, right? Like prior to your identity that you're able to present to the world, there is this swirling sea that always escapes you, and it's always moving, it's always changing, and it's part of this giant interconnected network, like where the boundaries of you and everyone else, like where you are and where everyone else is, like fade away. There's a beginning of a famous philosophy text from the 20th century called Anti-Oedipus. In like the first paragraph, they say, "What a shame it was to ever have called it the id." Now, id, you know, from Freud's like ego, superego, and id. So id is actually just a Latin word that means it. So like ego, superego, and it are actually just I, the above I, and the it, this other strange thing. And they say, what a shame it was to ever have called it the id. It is everywhere, right? And so that there's this idea that the entire world as this big, strange network that just kind of flows and flows and goes and goes and goes. And you can sort of, we have this kind of awareness of this that has to do with the way that the modern internet, see, interesting. So I talked about, so now the internet has this kind of rational process of communication, but then it enables this other strange layer on top of it where people are like making weirder and weirder stuff and are able to connect everywhere and kind of draw all these kind of lines and do messed up stuff like what I'm doing right now. Anyway, the reason you care about this, the reason you should care about this, about water, this realm, is that I was saying it exists before air, in a way. Like it exists as kind of like it's the thing that air is always kind of drawing on and like trying to affect. And it is like having a relationship with like this kind of sea of potential that exists before your representation of yourself. It is powerful and rewarding on its own terms, and it's just important. If you talk to people who, there are certain kinds of people who make art, and it's very common. People will tell you just like you got to do it. You got to do it. You got to make art. You got to make art or you're gonna die. You got to make art or I'm gonna kill you. Like this is a thing that people will say jokingly a lot. But there's something that they're really expressing there. That there is this sort of call that exists to really make contact with this kind of deeper inner strange beautiful core of you that has something unique to say, that is plugged into this unique place in the network, that like there's a kind of song that is happening around you and through you that you can make contact with and kind of like sing in little bits and spurts, and that only you can do. And that also by doing it, it's the thing about like air and these kind of rational representations of you, like these also have their own kind of call in them, where there's this call to learn about the world and to understand the world and to kind of be able to represent the world and kind of present who you are in a very clean, precise manner, and to say, my gender is XYZ, and I like this and this and that. But there is something about this that is like, there's this metastasization that happens of these, where they you, when you grab them, there at some level, like you begin to kind of cede control to the actual kind of fields of potential that swim beneath those kind of words that you use to describe yourself. What is a woman, for example, right? Like, and that's, not saying that you shouldn't be transgender or whatever, because I'm transgender. Not say it's bad to be a woman, because I'm a woman. But there's this kind of whole, there's this, there's a whole universe of meaning and discourse and understanding that exists behind any word that you use to try to capture a piece of reality. And you don't want to just be plugged into the words, you want to be plugged into that kind of weird thing underneath it. And it requires a kind of bravery, and it requires a kind of like a potential a willingness to kind of break to kind of break up and get outside of the things that you're trying to do, like, and trying to say. And the thing about air is that there's this, part of the thing about rational discourse is it's always kind of breaking down itself and kind of trying to reconstruct it, or whatever, because it wants to overcome itself and kind of like draw clean lines or whatever. And part of this is that you evolve concepts and stuff too. But there is this other thing that's happening. There's this other thing that's happening that's like, it's rebellious. Water has this kind of rebellious quality, right? Both of these things are real. Both of these things exist and are important on their own terms, and they don't, like, at base, they don't talk to each other, and they don't want to talk to each other. Like, this kind of ability to kind of go crazy and make weird art that doesn't say anything, and to kind of just become absorbed into kind of the giant sea of strange beauty and desire that's going about in the world, and the desire to kind of have a grasp on the world and a controlled representation of it. These things are opposed to each other. They're opposed to each other at base. And the more that you engage with each of them on their own terms, the more you realize these are really like separate capacities of the self and separate ways of understanding the world, right? And they have separate trajectories that they want the world to be aimed towards. And all right, that's water and air. Let's talk about fire. So at the very top of the tree is fire, and this is where the truly spiritual and the truly religious lives. And the thing is it's very, very, because it's so the thing is we're at the bottom, right? Or you kind of, the idea is that you kind of start down at the bottom. And I'll get down there last because it's complicated, but you start down at the bottom, right? You start down in earth, because this is kind down at the bottom. Earth is kind of quotidian life, where you're not really trying to engage with any sort of like something that's higher than you and beyond you. And at the furthest away from you is fire. And it has this quality of like, the thing about air and these kind of rational representations of the world is that, they kind of cohere things into identities, but in a way that is somewhat like degenerated and kind of dangerous, and can move the world and can be good, but like are in some ways they're kind of they're quantizing water, right? Fire is this realm where things exist, in kind of in a unity, but in a unity that is not like profane in the way that air is. Like fire is where your core true spiritual heart is. That's where like your that's your Buddha nature. That's your Buddha nature. That's God. That's like Atman, and that's really simplifying. That's really oversimplifying. But I'm throwing everything all at you all at once. That's the point, is to throw it all at once. So you just to have a kind of base that you can go figure all this out yourself by studying individual things, because this is a framework. This is a framework to build other things around, because it helps you separate things out so you can put them back together later on. Reiterating that is you want to separate these different things out, realize that they're all real, they don't want to talk to each other, and that you can start to understand them on their own terms, and then you can make your own specific way of trying to make them talk to each other. Anyway, so the realm of the truly religious is kind of, it's above and beyond the world in a way, and because it's the farthest away from where you start down the bottom, you can only make contact to it in like little flashes and little things here and there. But it is like, and there's this sense of kind of uncertainty to it. And so if you look right in between fire and water, there is this thing that is not numbered called dot. And it is not one of them. Technically, sort of, it's complicated. But basically, the idea is that actually making contact with this kind of higher realm where it all sort of comes together and it all sort of comes from, is always a like uncertain affair, right? Like whenever someone tells you that they have had a religious vision or made contact with God, or like they have direct knowledge of reality, you should be very skeptical of them. If you have those experiences, you should be careful about them. Not that I think it's good to be spiritual and it's good to kind of cultivate your contact with this. I'll come back to that. But there is this uncertainty about about this sort of thing coming together that always sort of like fades out. And you can, if you live a life where you're really kind of yearning to make contact with with your heart and with God and with kind of like a full understanding of the world, you can sort of begin to perceive a way it all fits together and to sort of kind of perceive these flashes more often. But you always have to be cautious of it, because if your understanding is always liable to fall apart or to explode or to kind of just be a representation of your ego. And that's and so that's dot, and it's also that's why it's just a quick aside is each of these have they each have an astrological thing associated with them, right? So at the bottom, Malkuth, the kingdom is and the only one in Earth is Earth, and then Yesod is the moon, and then Nazak is Venus, and Hod is Mercury. And Tiferet is the sun, Chesed is Jupiter, Gebra is Mars, Bina is Saturn, and Kokma is Mercy. I don't know why I said it like that. And then Keter. The people seem to go back and forth about whether or not Keter is Pluto or Neptune. But I say the way I see it is Keter is Pluto, and then Dot is Neptune. And so Neptune is associated with this kind of like with the higher self, but also with kind of illusion and like both creating and banishing illusion. And so this is why it makes sense for Dot to be knowledge, or Dot to be Neptune. But the thing is that fire is really real. This realm is really real, and it is part of you, and it is making contact with it is important on its own terms. And what does it want you to do? Like what is so in the same way that water wants you to get a little crazy and to make weird art and to kind of feel like you're part of this flow that moves beyond you, and is something kind of strange and irrational coming from your heart. In the same way that air wants you to kind of like try to grasp the world, and it wants to like kind of to put like create this kind of representation of reality. Fire wants you to get in touch with the essential oneness of all things, with the love that underlies everything, and with the process by which like the world could become heaven. Which precisely saying what heaven is very complicated, and the eschatology is a whole thing. But for a very, very simplified starting point, you could just think of whatever in your mind, whatever, if you're watching this video made by a trans woman with a VTuber model on a strange corner of the internet, the thing is that you probably think if they did real communism, it'd be good. It'd be great. The starting point, whatever you think real communism, quote unquote, real communism would be, that's your starting point. Now, part of what fire, like developing your relationship to fire means, is that you actually want to develop a more vivid, robust, and like personal notion of what like heaven really could be for you. Like, and have it in your mind and to keep it in your heart while you go about your daily life, and to understand that it is a higher goal than any of your other goals, right? Fire is at the top. This is like your spiritual core is the most important thing on its own terms. But it does seem to be the most important thing overall. But the difficulty is that you can't, it's very, very hard to get at it directly. It's very, very hard to get at it directly. You can only kind of work at it and work on everything else in the meantime. But what it wants you to, you want to kind of work on developing your own vision of what a better world could look like, of what a really radically different, changed world could look like, whatever quote unquote real communism would mean to you. But heaven gets at it better. But like this, world where everyone and everything is transformed into something more beautiful than you can even imagine, where the wounds are being healed and everyone is able to be both. This kind of like, there is this tension that is felt between the unique, like between the way that everything is, so if it's talking about air wants to create, the goal, the final version of air is like the standard model of all of reality, right? And you can think about it like the physics, like a kind of representation, like a unified representation of what everything is, right? Like if the world was like a simulation, like the laws of the simulation is what air wants to kind of get at and describe. It wants to kind of reduce everything to one big principle, but there's something that is kind of violent about that. And then water is, wants to just let everything be itself as part of this big network. But then there's something violent about that too. And the realm of fire is imagining that like these things could really be overcome, that there could be this world where the unique difference of everything as this beautiful, the beautiful uniqueness of everyone and everything could really be preserved, while also like at the same time the oneness of all things, the identity of all things could also be preserved without either of like that there is a way in which these two things really are not violence against one another, but are one. Now, this is what the Christian Trinity means. This is what like but we'll get back to that. So you want to get in contact with fire. How do you do that? Cultivating in your heart a sense of hope for a better world and a vivid picture of it, a more robust picture of it. part of it. Main thing is you want to do spiritual exercises. If you're doing anything with regularity, that's better than nothing. Don't just be someone who just don't you want to actually you have to really work your heart. You have to really work it. Okay? And it's less about like just doing a lot and more about it doing regularity. You want to do something like ideally a little bit of something every day. And this could be just as simple as writing a journal entry, but more explicitly spiritual stuff, especially stuff that has like an aesthetic component that can really get you into it, is really good, right? I personally highly recommend the Rosary, especially the Universal Orthodox Rosary, which is Hila Hendrix's version of this, which is mostly similar, but it replaces some of the prayers, in particular the Hail Mary, which is a kind of weird prayer that is a little kind of the Hail Mary is this very emphasis on kind of sinfulness and stuff, which is sin is anyway. I recommend the Rosary and recommend looking up the Universal Orthodox Rosary. Rosary is very good. Like I recommend like straight prayer is good. Like just trying to just directly speak in a personal way to whatever this thing is that is above and beyond you, that is you are imagining is loving and wants the world to be changed. That's good. Meditation, different kinds of meditation are also good. I personally like Zen meditation a lot, but it is kind of difficult because you just kind of stare at the wall. But meditation, different kinds of meditation, those are good. Look into those. Or yoga, especially yoga that is like explicitly spiritual, is good. But the physical act itself is still like it's got something potent into it. Spiritual exercises like these are good. Maybe these are you want to have something and you want to do at least a little bit of it like every day is the goal. And maybe it's as simple as just like affirmations to yourself or something, but you want to start somewhere and you want to get in contact with it, because the thing is it only shows up in little bits and pieces, and you have to continue to cultivate your trust that it's there so that it can move you when it needs to, while at the same time like understanding that whatever your grasp of it is at any given time might just fully be illusory and might just like be a trick that is it's hard to grasp directly. You want to trust, so that you want to trust that it is really there, but you don't know what it is, and that whatever you think it is at any given time might not be it. Like that's how you avoid falling into you want to stay sane. You don't want to fall into some kind of fundamentalism. You don't want to like you don't want to become some kind of weird fundamentalist. You don't want to be going around talking about how you are God. You don't want to be talking about like, you don't want to be talking about your personal you don't want to be getting kind of crazy about your unverified personal gnosis or whatever, and not that it is necessarily bad to have those kind of experiences, but you have to have a care about them, because the thing is spiritual forces are real, but not all of them are good, and not all of them are what you think they are. Some of them are sometimes it's just your brain. Anyway. So, now down to earth. This is where we're kind of starting out. Like I said earlier, earth is where your kind of ordinary physical bodily needs and goals live. You need a little bit of money to live. You need some food to eat. You might need you have physical desires. You need touch. You need care. You need a little bit of warmth. You work hard and you need some distraction when you get home. You want something that tastes good. You want something that feels good. You want to just get along in the world, right? You want to just live your life. That's the kind of basic mode of it, right? So just as each of these I described, okay, they have they have a kind of, a highest mode that is a best thing, math and science are beautiful and they create these beautiful things, but there is this danger where there's processes, reason can be very violent. the creative process, making beautiful art and beautiful things and kind of becoming a little kind of unhinged is this kind of beautiful thing. And sometimes you can make something that people aren't ready for yet and kind of brings about a whole new generation after you of just something that's totally different. And that's good too. But also there's this kind of, you can actually just go crazy. You can actually just go crazy and you can get like mean and weird and violent and uncompassionate because you're so devoted to your personal creative vision. Or you can just, cut off people because you don't take people, you don't have empathy. Or you can just become you can become a servant to something that is like bad, that is bigger than you, because you just want to do, you just want to make powerful creative work in the anyway. So there's a potential violence there, and and you may fire, there's this love and compassion there, but you can also just become a megalomaniac. You could also you become think, oh my god, I'm God, I have direct access to the fundamental nature of reality, and you become a fundamentalist, or you become haughty or very judgmental, or you think you have an idea of what the reality is, but it's actually just like false. So they each have a good side and a bad side. So the ordinary mode of where you're starting out is you have these kind of these quotidian, these everyday concerns about this stuff you need. So we're down here at Earth, these ordinary concerns about stuff you need. And it's good. You got to have those. You got needs. You got to be fine. But the thing is those can often hold you back, and you can become blinded to the fact that there's something more than this, right? So remember, each of these, all four of these are good. All four of these are important. And at base, they do not talk to each other. You want to separate them out before you start trying to make them talk to each other. You want to realize that they're separate and they have different assumptions, different explanation of the world, and there are different parts of you. And these immediate kind of needs that you have are not like the end all be all of you. And oftentimes many of these can be quite addictive, because they're the most, the stuff down there at the level of the kind of base daily needs is plugged into your physical, the physicalness of your being in some of the most powerful way, right? You can be addicted to substances, to drugs. You can be addicted to food. You can be addicted to like pure physical pleasure, or oppression that is, and beyond just addiction, there's also kind of oppression that can be happening to you physically because of the world around you, right? Like you don't like it, there's all sorts of kind of, that's some of the most powerful stuff and the most difficult stuff. And you want to overcome and go beyond this. But it also has a positive, there is a positive, more powerful relationship that you can have to this. Because the thing is at the base, you are a unique individual. You're a unique individual. And there is something that is kind of there's something beautiful about your kind of frailty and your, there's something beautiful and tender about your frailty and your existence on Earth for only a short period of time, and that you have to reproduce your needs, and there is a more beautiful relationship to this version of you. The thing is that you in this kind of daily life are kind of confronted with these three higher realms that are above you. And it's painful and powerful to realize that they're there and that they're above you and they're more powerful than you, and you don't know what to do about them. You don't know how to grab hold of them in any way or to relate to them in any way. And you just kind of want to retreat into your realm where you just kind of have your cozy anime and your weed, and you just kind of do what you need to do, and to just get through the day. And you don't want to think about and engage with these kind of scary parts of you that you don't know how they're going to change your life or what they're going to do, you know? Um, and and that there are these kind of forces that are happening in the world that are beyond you that you can't grasp. And like, you might want to just identify with some sort of political identity that makes you feel like you have a grasp on them, or some consumer identities and stuff. Anyway, but there is a much more kind of beautiful, like, there is this kind of reality to you that is not effaceable, that if you endure the pain to confront these kind of other parts of you, of air, water, and fire, right? That it allows you to then venture through them and then bring them back home in a way, right? So you venture into these, you venture out into these other realms, and then you bring them back home in a transformed way and are able to kind of change your daily life with the skills and knowledge and kind of like faith that you've acquired through these other things, and establish like the truest version of Earth is that you are establishing a new way of life, for yourself or for a group of people, or for the whole world, right? But so that's the flip side of the quotidian, is a new way of life that you've established, the daily that comes from your heart, that is particularly you and allows you to kind of flourish in a more and more unique way, like that your tenderness points to a particular kind of uniqueness, your a weakness that is transformed and particular and militant and very kind of aware of like this, just what it means to be, but it goes beyond it, and brings all of this into it, instead of just kind of living, is thriving, and uh, that's the beginning. That's where you start.